Hey, this is David Plotz, CEO of CityCast. I have a favor to ask before we get to today's conversation. We're doing our annual listener survey, and it would really help us out if you took it. And even if you took it last year, we'd be grateful if you took it again, because we can't use last year's data. Please go to citycast.fm/survey to take the survey. It's only 7 minutes long, we know, because we timed it. That's citycast.fm/survey. And when you take the survey, you'll also be eligible to win a $250 Visa gift card and CityCast swag, that great CityCast swag. citycast.fm/survey.
Today on CityCast Philly, it's our Wednesday politics show, and we're joined by Lauren Vitas, our new politics contributor. Lauren works in government relations in the city and writes the City Hall Roll Call newsletter for the Committee of 70. It's Wednesday, January 29th. I'm Trinity Nuri, and here's what Philly's talking about. First off, most importantly, how are you feeling, Lauren, about those Eagles?
It was a thumping. I think the win was extra special, not only because now we're going to the Super Bowl again, where we can avenge our loss from a couple years ago, but taking out an NFC East rival on the way to do it just feels so good.
How did you celebrate?
I was actually in Paris for the game.
Oh, fancy.
We found an NFL bar. And very quickly, the Eagles fans outnumbered the Commanders fans, and we sort of took it over. But it was definitely a joyous evening. I will say the Parisians did not celebrate as effusively as the Philadelphians did upon victory, but we did our best to bring the Philadelphia energy to Paris.
Nice. All right, let's come back to Philly for a second and talk about City Council. They're back. But Lauren, I mean, they wasted nearly 2 years talking about the 76ers arena in Center City that never was. So now what? Because they have to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah, I think that city officials and city council really looked at the arena as a key component to the revitalization of Market East, which is a really struggling commercial corridor now. We've got significant vacancy rates, and I think Macy's announcing that it was closing down, leaving a huge hole in the Wanamaker building is big news. It's big news. So I think the city is taking it. I think Mayor Parker's taking it in stride. I think council's taking it in stride. And they're focused on, okay, if it's not going to be this, what is it going to be? Because it needs to be something.
Right. So any word or ideas of what that something could be?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of conversation about bringing some more mixed-use development to Market East. So, as I mentioned, it's a commercial corridor. There's a lot of office buildings. There's a lot of retail, but trying to do some infill development with residential to really bring more people to that area full-time, which will hopefully support the commercial corridor more than it's getting now.
Like I said at the beginning, City Council is back in session. So what proposals have piqued your interest, Lauren, from their first session of 2025?
Yeah, so we didn't see too many big pieces of legislation that were really policy focused. I thought there were a couple of noteworthy introductions related to calling for hearings on a variety of matters. Councilman Thomas introduced a resolution calling for hearings on the school district's use of what are called rubber rooms. Mm-hmm. So if a teacher has a complaint against them, while that complaint's investigated, they're basically assigned to this room to just sit and literally hang out all day until that investigation has been completed. And I think Councilman Thomas is worried about just the number of school district teachers that are assigned to these rooms and the length of time it's taking for these investigations to be completed. Obviously the school district needs every teacher active and available. So losing these folks to these rooms for months at a time is impacting not only the budget, but, kids' educational outcomes.
For sure.
And then Councilman Harity introduced a resolution calling on hearings to discuss the impact of the sugar-sweetened beverage tax on Philadelphia businesses, trades, and consumers. I think he wants to take a look at it and see, is this tax driving people to do their shopping outside of Philadelphia? Is this having a negative impact? And he's made it clear that, he has no sort of agenda one way or the other, but wants to learn more about the issue now that the tax has been on the books for a number of years. And full disclosure, that was an issue I worked on when it was first passed.
It was a big deal. I mean, similar to like the whole Sixers arena. I mean, there was a lot of pushback, I remember, about this tax.
Yeah, there was a lot of pushback. And Councilman Harity, when he gave his speech on the floor of council, he expressed concern that folks who have the resources to leave the city to do their food shopping are able to, and folks who don't have resources to maybe own a car or to just be able to like call an Uber and travel to go get their groceries, they're disproportionately paying a higher percentage of that tax just because they can't leave the city to do their shopping. So I think he's looking at it from like an equity standpoint, but also an economic standpoint. So I think, it'll be interesting to see what any new studies say, things like that. But, this is also comes on the heels of the Philadelphia Tax Reform Commission, who was reconvened last year, who is expected to deliver its report right around the time the mayor delivers her annual budget address. So I think it's all sort of like a larger conversation about Philadelphia's tax structure and making sure that it's not only fair, but that it's not driving businesses and residents out of the city.
There was also conversation from council member at large Rue Landau about some hearings in regards to how the city was going to protect immigrant and other marginalized communities during the Trump administration. What have you heard about this?
So they actually held that hearing last week, and it was a very well-attended hearing. It seems that the main point of concern is Philadelphia's immigrant population. This is a constituency that I think people are very worried about being vulnerable in the new administration. So a lot of the conversation was the city's relationship with ICE. And when does the city cooperate with ICE? When does the city not cooperate with ICE? And so I think those conversations and fleshing out what does that cooperation look like, what are the limits of that cooperation, are something that we're going to be seeing over the next couple of weeks.
How does the city respond in terms of like with ICE and local law enforcement?
So the city's position is that if ICE makes a request to hold somebody that would otherwise not be legally required to be held, they will not hold that person merely because ICE requests that hold. What the city has said is that if ICE says we have a warrant or we have some sort of court order that this person needs to be held, they will comply with any legal court order, but they are not going to voluntarily hold folks just at the request of ICE.
We'll have more after the break.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The new year brings new health goals and wealth goals. Protecting your identity is an important step. LifeLock monitors millions of data points per second. If your identity is stolen, LifeLock's restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Resolve to make identity health and wealth part of your New Year's goals with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Lauren, what else are you hearing from local Democrats and how they're responding to these earlier weeks of the Trump administration? Because a lot has happened. A lot has unfolded.
A lot has unfolded. I think one of the main concerns that I've been hearing both from elected officials that I work closely with who are working on some larger projects, as well as clients who I'm working with who, are going after federal grants and things like that, is that the Trump administration has basically turned off the spigot of money flowing into the states right now. So people who were invited to apply for grants, by the federal government, just get project support, those meetings are getting canceled. That money is essentially being held up by the Trump administration, who basically put a hold on any funding going out. So I think there's a lot of concern about the city's long-term plans, about these like longer-term projects that are going to require federal support, seeing that support just sort of evaporate overnight and not really knowing what it's going to look like moving forward. So particularly around like infrastructure and larger capital projects where the federal government has a stake in them, there's a lot of concern and uncertainty about what does this look like moving forward.
So what are the Democrats saying about Trump so far?
People are rightfully concerned about some of the appointments that have been made for some of the larger institutions and larger agencies, where people who are being put in charge of these agencies don't necessarily support these agencies. They're being put in charge of them to kind of break these agencies down and limit the scope of these agencies. So agencies that are very important to Philadelphia, like the housing and urban development, there's a lot of concern about the qualifications of folks being put into these roles and what the motivation of those folks is once they get there. Do they actually want to use this agency as a change for good? Or are they there to kind of make government smaller and limit spending and things like that? So I think Philadelphia Democrats in particular are very concerned about just the impact of the city receives a lot of federal money, and that's going to trickle down and impact some of our most vulnerable citizens.
I'm curious about the working relationships. Senator Fetterman has been accused of kissing up to Trump. Shapiro came out really strongly against Trump's recent pardons of January 6th rioters. The mayor's been kind of quiet, but said, she would be kind of willing to work with President Trump. So what is the working relationship going to be like with our elected officials?
Yeah, I think it's definitely going to be challenging, and I think there's going to need to be some trust building, because I just don't think there's a lot of trust right now in the federal government. So I think, the mayor's position of, she sort of has been dealt this hand, and she's a very pragmatic politician, where I think she is more concerned about the outcome for the city than whatever sort of political maneuvering needs to happen to guarantee the best outcome for Philadelphia. I think the mayor is going to kind of hold her nose and do what she needs to do on behalf of the city.
Shifting gears, what's going on with the district attorney's race?
So there's a district attorney's race coming up. I know that everybody is probably very burnt out from this past election.
Oh, for sure.
But we have a spring primary in May, and the district attorney is up for re-election, Larry Krasner. So this will be his third term. And he does have a Democratic challenger in the primary, a former municipal court judge, Judge Dugan, Pat Dugan. It's interesting. He's running... gun violence and the homicide rate has been such a major issue in the city of Philadelphia over the last 8 years. And we've really seen a significant drop in both the number of victims and incidents. And so typically you would think that the person running against the incumbent district attorney would be running as on gun violence, but Dugan is actually running on lower level offenses, on nonviolent crime, on sort of the retail theft stuff that he is saying is driving businesses out of the city. So more quality of life type issues than the larger issues that we've seen in past election cycles for the district attorney. So he's running as a pro-business, pro-trades, pro-getting people to move to the city, and really focusing on quality of life stuff. So it'll be interesting. He'll have financial support, so that will make him a legitimate challenger. But yeah, remains to be seen.
I mean, what's the story with Krasner not getting the endorsement from the Democratic Party in the city, even though he's a Democrat? And like you just said, Dugan is getting support from the powerful building trades union.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more Krasner, when he really ran as like an outsider. And I don't think he's ever really been focused on trying to play the political game that a lot of outsiders, once they are elected, do start to play. I think he's really just been focused on doing the job of district attorney that he feels folks elected him to do, which is reforming how we do a lot of our criminal justice issues. And so he's really focused on the substance of his work and not really the political scene.
All right, Lauren, for almost 30 years, there was a column in the Daily News Enquirer all about political gossip. The Inky announced recently that the column Clout has been canceled. So that's why we want to do these weekly Wednesday politics episodes, which we hope, you can be on for a lot of them. And we want to know any, gossip that you know about, what's happening down in City Hall.
Oh, any City Hall gossip? It's been pretty quiet. I think the big news was really the 76ers arena just shortly after the mayor signed those bills, the Sixers announcing that they had reached an agreement with Comcast So that really sucked a lot of oxygen out of the room, I would say.
For sure, yeah.
I wish I had something interesting to report, but usually that's good for the citizens of Philadelphia when things are quiet in City Hall.
Well, Lauren, maybe everyone in council is reading Inner Excellence and rethinking some things.
They are indeed, because Majority Leader Kathy Gilmore Richardson was kind enough to buy everybody a copy. So I anticipate that we will have a very focused and locked in city council in 2025, just like our Philadelphia Eagles have been focused and locked in this season. I think we're going to see a very Go Birds positive Thursday council session. It's late January now. The mayor's administration is in the process of pulling the budget together. So that's always something to watch. And we've got 2026 coming up next year. So it's the semi-sesquicentennial. So I think this is going to be a very busy spring for council. I think they're going to have a lot on their plate, both from a planning perspective as well as a budgetary perspective. So
Lauren Vitas, our new politics contributor, thanks so much for joining me today on CityCast Philly.
Thank you so much for having me, and go Birds.
That's all for today here on CityCast Philly. If you enjoyed this episode about local politics, tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to sign up for our morning newsletter, Hey Philly, to learn more about what else Philly's talking about. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.